Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari-chan, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are excited because guess what? Today we are finishing the main story of Peerless by Meng Xi Shi, also known as Wu Shuang, and we'll be covering 3 more chapters, 184 through 187, which means after the main story, the next day, we will be taking a peek at the epilogues. So let's see what happens, shall we? Chapter 184. The Emperor was quick to adapt to the situation. After listening to their explanation, he gathered his thoughts and forced himself to breathe deeply. Moments ago, he'd been isolated and surrounded by enemies. At least now he had 2 companions by his side. Following their lead, he lowered his voice to a whisper. "What should we do now, Tsway? Another emperor might have balked at taking commands from his subjects. But Yang Jian was under no illusions. It would be impossible to escape by himself. Jiang Suan may have been the martial artist among them, but the one he trusted most was still Tsway Boo-qoo. Tsway Boo-qoo, too, dispensed with the usual courtesies. "Your Majesty, can you remember how you got here?" The emperor flushed. He'd been in such a panic after falling, it hadn't occurred to him to take note of his route. Let me think. He had an excellent memory. Thinking back over the stone walls he'd touched, he said, "Follow me." Jiang Suan lit no fire, lest it draw the attention of eyes within the darkness. Instead, he placed his hand on the emperor's arm to guide him. Tsway Boo-qoo followed a step behind. The emperor felt along the carvings, recalling the mural he'd found. Men on horse and camelback rode from far and wide to pay their respects to the Bodhisattva, who sat high on the throne of lotuses. The Bodhisattva's fingers were bent in a mudra, their pose exuding an air of untouchable serenity. Auspicious clouds were depicted in the mural. The emperor's fingers quickly found their stylized whorls. Above the clouds were the Bodhisattva he recalled. Now more confident, he pushed forward. "There was a man impersonating me. He was unconscious just up ahead." "Stay here, Your Majesty. Let me check." Jiang Suan Bodhi left the emperor to Tsway Boo-qoo, who put a hand on his shoulder and strode toward the spot the emperor had indicated. "There's no one here, Your Majesty." "How can that be?" The emperor couldn't believe it. The impostor had been out cold. How could he have woken so quickly? Even if he had, he would have made some kind of noise they'd have heard. He took a few involuntary steps forward, as if to verify the impostor's absence himself. Tsway Boo-qoo's hand slipped from his shoulder. "Your Majesty, there are many hidden passages here. We should stay together," Tsway Boo-qoo cautioned. "That man mimicked my voice and appearances so flawlessly even I might have mistaken him for myself. If he escapes, it will spell trouble." The emperor bent and began to search his surroundings, but found nothing under his fingers beyond coarse sand and stones. He furrowed his brow. Impossible. He distinctly remembered the impostor emperor falling and landing on top of him. He'd shoved the impostor away, and his head had struck the stone wall. He'd probably bled. The faint scent of blood did linger in the air. The emperor searched again and felt a small, damp patch. So this was the place. But then, where was the fake emperor? "He must be nearby," the emperor muttered. Perhaps he'd woken in a daze and silently found a place to hide. There was no reply from Tsway Boo-qoo and Jiang Suan. "Tsway-chan-chang? Jiang Suan? How could this be? Just moments ago, Tsway Boo-qoo and Jiang Suan had been a few steps behind him. They couldn't have failed to hear him." He thrust his hands out again and felt something warm. It felt like a bare human foot, the skin rough and craggy as scales. Drip, drip. Water fell from above and below onto the emperor's forehead. He reached up unthinkingly and wiped it away. His fingers came away sticky, stinking of copper. Not water. Blood. Wind rushed past his ears, and a light flared behind him. The emperor turned to see Jiang Suan holding a torch. He stiffened in realization and slowly, jerkily looked up at the figure clinging to the ceiling above him. A person. No, it could no longer be called that. The creature had human limbs, but its hair was completely gone. Its face and scalp were crimson, shiny and swollen as if scalded with boiling water. Its skin was riddled with countless holes, through which black and white worms crawled. Where eyes had once resided, there were only 2 hollow sockets filled with flickering black flames. Its limbs were covered in scales, and its nails were long, blackened, and extraordinarily sharp. The monster stared at the emperor, who froze like a rabbit beneath the glare of a venomous snake. All the hair on his neck stood up as he looked at those worms. He yearned to shuck his skin and flee, to leave this place so he didn't have to keep looking at the thing. He couldn't speak. All he managed was a wordless gasp. The emperor thought he'd seen it all. He'd never imagined a creature like this could exist. No wonder Jiang Xuan and Tsway Boo-qoo had been so cryptic. No one could maintain their composure before such a sight. Belatedly, the emperor realized his hand was still resting on the monster's foot. His soul almost fled his body in terror, and he yanked his hand back. The monster growled deep in its throat and lunged. It moved as fast as lightning, swiping its sharp nails at the crown of the emperor's head. A gust of rancid wind rushed toward the emperor. He had no time to evade. He was going to die. The thought had barely formed when flames erupted between him and the monster. Jiang Xuan had thrown the torch while the emperor stood stunned. The monster recoiled in pain as the torch struck its head. "Lord Chief!" Jiang Xuan Bodhi shouted. There was no response. Tsway Boo-qoo was nowhere to be seen. The torch fell to the ground, illuminating a suspiciously large pool of blood, yet it failed to reveal Tsway Boo-qoo. The monster gave a low roar and barreled toward them. Jiang Xuan shoved the emperor behind him and drew out his palm, pushing the creature back with a blast of wind. He was wary of getting too close. Tsway Boo-qoo had warned him that the worms crawling over the monster were deadly. If even 1 or 2 of them entered his body, he'd be afflicted by the goo. The goo worms didn't take over their host at once. They lay dormant within the body, waiting for their moment to strike. Those who managed to excise the worms in time, like Pei Jingzhe, were few. Most ended up like the residents at Yandong Mountain Estate, driven to madness by the goo invading their minds. At that stage, there was no cure. This made it much more difficult to fight. Jiang Xuan could have fled with the emperor, but they still had no idea where Tsway Boo-qoo had gone. The emperor plastered himself to the wall, afraid to move, and called out again for Tsway Boo-qoo. There was no response. The monster fought savagely. Jiang Xuan was forced to expend more and more energy to block each strike. Suddenly, he realized this creature had its own cunning. It had lured them into the depths of the labyrinth, and now it sought to exhaust his true qi. He couldn't stall any longer. The emperor was still beside him, and his safety had to come first. That was both Jiang Xuan's duty and Tsway Boo-qoo's order. Gritting his teeth, Jiang Xuan shoved the monster back a few steps. Then he seized the emperor and then sprinted off down the passageway. The monster followed them into the boundless dark. Tsway Boo-qoo stood in silence with his back to the cold stone wall. He could feel the contours of the stone carvings through his clothes. It was a depiction of a Buddhist tale, the Astasana listening to Buddhist scriptures. But he couldn't make a sound around the hand tightly gripping his throat. The face of the person choking him was inches from his own. His breath was light. The occasional puff of warm air fanned over Tsway Boo-qoo's face. His fingers were slender yet strong, their skin dry and cool. Tsway Boo-qoo couldn't make out his silhouette in the darkness, but he knew who it was. This person was using their left hand. A number of Jianghu practitioners were left-handed, but there was only one both present here and hostile to him. Xiao Lu. Only when the monster had chased Jiang Xuan and the emperor into the distance did Xiao Lu loosen his grip. He struck Tsway Boo-qoo's acupoint, rendering him immobile. We meet again, Chief Tsway. It's a pleasure, Pavilion Leader Xiao. They greeted each other like close companions, old friends reunited after years apart. There was no hint of animosity, but Tsway Boo-qoo guessed that, if it were up to Xiao Lu, he'd never have come down here. It seemed Feng throwing the fake emperor down had forced his hand. Tsway Boo-qoo could vaguely make out the man slumped nearby. Tsway Boo-qoo coughed a few times. What was that creature just now? You're so sure I know? It seemed Xiao was still in the mood to joke. Chief Tsway, you overestimate me. This underground labyrinth was built to house the 8 treasures. Booby traps and various poisons make sense. That creature doesn't. That thing is no beast. It's a living person who's been cast into a pool of goo. After 49 days, their flesh was perforated and the goo eroded and took control of their body. Now they're a walking corpse driven solely by the urge to kill. Human goo couldn't be made from just anyone. The host had to have a strong physique, preferably that of a martial artist, to withstand the relentless waves of goo burrowing through skin and muscles and tear into their organs. They could only watch helplessly as their body was riddled with holes until they finally died in agony. Nurturing a monster so sinister and deadly demanded no small effort from its creator. Xiao was silent a moment. That human goo was once the head disciple of the Nanhua sect, Song Yuan-tao. Tsway Boo-qoo was stunned. Kuhezhen has only been in the Central Plains for a few months. Song Yuan-tao has been missing for over 3 years. How did he fall into a Gukturk prince's hands? Xiao sighed. At the time, the Nanhua sect was embroiled in internal strife. The sect leader remarried a beautiful young woman, but she fell in love with the head disciple, Song Yuan-tao. The leader and his wife clashed, and the sect was fragmented. Alone, Song Yuan-tao set out beyond the Great Wall to search for his shifu. Nothing more was heard from him, a terrible pity. He had great potential and could have revitalized the Nanhua sect, but fate laughed at him, and he perished. Were you involved with this, Pavilion Leader Xiao? If I said I wasn't, would you believe me? I would, said Tsway Boo-qoo coolly. You have no scruples, but you're not a liar. Xiao smiled. If only you were willing to abandon Tsway, you and I would surely become companions capable of reading each other's thoughts. Tsway Boo-qoo ignored this comment. How did you discover this place? Lady Ashina. Tsway Boo-qoo needed only a moment to recall everything connected to this name. The Empress? Correct. 15 years ago, the daughter of Mu-Tian Kagan, Lady Ashina, married Yuwen Yong. The Gukturks were Buddhists, and Lady Ashina had been no exception. At the time, Buddhism's expansive influence had begun to threaten the emperor's authority, and Yuwen Yong ordered a crackdown on the religion. He expelled monks from the country and even destroyed several sections of Daxing Temple. It was this last that led to the discovery of the entrance to the labyrinth. Upon learning of it, Lady Ashina had ordered an investigation. But those who entered never returned, and the investigation came to an unsatisfying end. The entrance to the maze was sealed soon after, but it remained on Lady Ashina's mind. She ordered Daxing Temple's plans collected from the library and sent to the Khaganate for examination. Tsway Boo-qoo furrowed his brow. So the plans from the Jin dynasty ended up in the hands of the Gukturks, and from there made their way to Kuhezhen? Said Xiao. Back when the temple was first constructed, the Buddha statues were crafted from wooden sticks and bent reed frames, then secured with a base of white clay and painted. The only exception was the Great Buddha in the Mahavira Hall, which is hollowed and contains the entrance to the labyrinth. I'd already visited the temple long before your emperor sealed it off. Tsway Boo-qoo had guessed the enemy would disguise themselves as monks or the emperor's attendants to infiltrate the temple. He'd never anticipated something like an entire secret labyrinth. Xiao seemed to sense his thoughts. Surprising, isn't it? But I didn't expect the Gukturks to choose this moment to turn against me. I thought Kuhezhen would at least wait until I had the situation in hand before making his move. But Kuhezhen clearly wasn't operating on the same principles. To him, there was little difference between Xiao and the Emperor of Tsway. Both were men he could use to further his plans of sowing discord in the Central Plains. Well then, Pavilion Leader Xiao, we're in the same boat. It'd be wise to cooperate, at least until we're out of the labyrinth. Xiao smiled. I agree. Please go ahead. Do you know the way? I don't, said Xiao. Kuhezhen never showed me the plans. I must trouble you to guide me. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't answer. He merely started walking. Xiao had tapped the fake emperor's mute acupoint earlier. He lifted the silent man easily to his feet and followed close behind Tsway Boo-qoo. The passage was deep and dark. The only sound the tap of their footsteps. The fake emperor, still dazed, stumbled as he walked, his footfalls unpleasantly discordant. Though the fake emperor was a crucial part of his plan, Xiaolu's treatment of him made it clear how little regard he had for him. This impostor couldn't be a high-ranking member of the 13 floors. Perhaps he was truly only a puppet. What a puppet thought or felt about Xiao was of no concern to him. It needed only to fulfill its role. The three men edged along the wall, each harboring their own motives, each with their own agendas. Xiao let Tsway Boo-qoo take the lead. If any danger arose, he could use him as a shield. But Tsway Boo-qoo made no comment. He walked slowly, memorizing each turn. But he quickly realized this was futile. "The wall carvings are repeating," he said. "What do you mean?" Xiao arched a brow. "When we started walking, I was touching a mural of the Astasana listening to sutras. Next was a mural of Prince Mahasattva's sacrifice of himself to the tigers. Then another tale about the crown prince retrieving treasures from the sea. But now the sequence is repeating." "Perhaps they are multiple copies of the same mural?" "No. If they were copies, I'd find slight differences in the details. But I remember what I touched. They're the same mural." They were going in circles. Xiao sighed. "I'm starting to regret not asking Kuhezhen for the plans of this labyrinth." Then again, even if he had asked, Kuhezhen might not have shared them. Tsway Boo-qoo thought for a moment, then pulled out a torch and lit it. The darkness surrounding them was endless, the flame a tiny puddle of brightness. Still, by its light, they could see that they were at the edge of a circular hall. Standing in the center, not far from them, was a low stone pillar. "If I'm not mistaken," said Tsway Boo-qoo, "the center of the labyrinth symbolizes the yin and yang, heaven and earth, sun and moon. The 8 stars around it embody the 8 trigrams of the Bagua. We passed one when we arrived. It must have been the Shuan trigram. As for this one..." The stone pillar shone brilliantly in the torchlight, its white jade surface shimmering with an ethereal and captivating glow. Tsway Boo-qoo took an involuntary step closer. The fake emperor was similarly entranced. He staggered forward, moving even faster than Tsway Boo-qoo as he reached out to touch it. Even Xiao almost lost himself. He took one step forward, then another. Just as he took his third, he halted in alarm. Xiao prided himself on his iron willpower. Even if a heavenly demoness were dancing seductively before him, Xiao could close his eyes against the sight. But somehow that white jade tower was causing his self-restraint to unravel. How could this be? It wasn't that his will was weak. There was something wrong with the tower. He slammed his eyes shut. Tsway Boo-qoo's torch was guttering out, its flame flickering. In the wavering torchlight, the white jade tower seemed to emit a crimson glow, eerie and surreal. "Get back!" Tsway Boo-qoo cried. The torch went out. Everything was plunged into darkness. A scream split the air. If Xiao had had the use of both hands, he might have grabbed both his companions. But he could only use one. Xiao yanked Tsway Boo-qoo backward. By then, it was too late for the fake emperor. Tsway Boo-qoo also reacted swiftly. As soon as Xiao pulled him into his arms, he whipped out another torch and lit it. The torch hissed and flared, illuminating the fake emperor. He was bound to the white tower by countless red threads. At least 7 or 8 were coiled around his head and neck, digging into his flesh so deeply that blood welled up as they watched. The threads tightened, and the fake emperor's eyes bulged one final time in death. Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo's breaths stopped in their throat. They were neither sheltered nor naive. Both had witnessed countless horrors. Yet the death of the impostor was beyond their comprehension. Xiao pulled on Tsway Boo-qoo's wrist to bring the torch closer, then took a few steps forward. "The red threads are coming out of the tower." He dropped Tsway Boo-qoo's wrist and struck the pillar. It shattered under the force of his true qi, revealing a hollow interior. Here was the source of the threads. The place that must have once held a monk's sarira now housed a small, human-shaped puppet instead. Countless red threads wound around it, and the faint scent of sandalwood wafted toward them. Touching the pillar had triggered the mechanism, releasing both the red threads and the entrancing fragrance. Even a true martial expert would struggle to escape its effects, let alone Xiaolu's fake emperor. Tsway Boo-qoo had been close to the tower as well. If not for Xiaolu's timely tug, he likely wouldn't have escaped unscathed. Tsway Boo-qoo bent and examined the pillar, then straightened. Someone's tampered with it. Releasing the human goo in here isn't the only thing Kuhezhen did. He's revamped the place. Xiaolu brushed his fingers over the imposter's neck. How is he? Asked Tsway Boo-qoo. Beyond saving, said Xiaolu slowly. With the fake emperor dead, Xiaolu's plan had already partially failed. Tsway Boo-qoo should have felt victorious, but seeing as they were trapped here with no guarantee of making it out alive, it would be wise not to provoke Xiaolu overmuch. Who was to say Xiaolu wouldn't feed him to the human goo if he became angry enough? Tsway Boo-qoo coughed and said with feigned sympathy, be at peace. The corner of Xiaolu's mouth twitched. It would have been more convincing if you hadn't said it. Tsway Boo-qoo swiftly changed the subject. Kuhezhen has turned this place of worship into a purgatory of his own making. We must find a way out, and quickly. Let's go. The words were hardly out of his mouth when he felt a jolt of alarm. Something had shifted beneath his feet. Tsway Boo-qoo looked down. Fine fissures snaked through the earth beneath him. They widened rapidly, growing from the thickness of a finger to the width of a palm. Xiaolu grabbed Tsway Boo-qoo and leapt toward the wall. The ground beneath the jade pillars split as it collapsed, cracks radiating outward from the center of the chamber. Stones and dirt crumbled away beneath them as they clung to the wall. Xiaolu gave a muffled grunt. The hand gripping Tsway Boo-qoo's arm went limp, and they both plummeted down into the darkness. Chapter 185. Neither Tsway Boo-qoo nor Xiaolu had known the labyrinth had an entire second floor beneath the first. Well, dang. In the blink of an eye, the situation had changed again. The ground beneath Tsway Boo-qoo's feet gave way, and he crashed to the floor below, landing heavily on his side. Pain exploded through his body. He moaned before he could stop himself. His arm was probably broken, but the agony in his back was even worse. What was more, the fall had aggravated his symptoms. He began to cough non-stop, the taste of metal surging up his throat. He spat out 2 mouthfuls of blood. The only sound in the darkness was harsh panting, both his own and Xiaolu's. Tsway Boo-qoo was unable to pull himself up to check on his companion. All he could do was lie on his back and wait for the whirling shadows before his eyes to slow. After a long while, he heard Xiaolu say calmly, "You're dying." He wasn't mocking or cursing Tsway Boo-qoo. He could hear it in his breathing. Tsway Boo-qoo's chest heaved, as if he was trying and failing to draw all the air he could into his body. His heart and lungs must have felt like they were aflame. It wasn't just Tsway Boo-qoo's organs that were burning up, but the scant bit of life left in him. He'd been born with a fragile body, and his ailments had been aggravated by his circumstances. By all rights, Tsway Boo-qoo should have died long ago. Yet he'd insisted on dragging his sickly body along the boundary between life and death, borrowing a full 30 years of life from the heavens. But what was borrowed must one day be repaid. And for this man who defied his fate, the price was unbearable, bone-rending agony. Xiaolu understood Tsway Boo-qoo had spent those 30 years in perpetual suffering. He had never known a day of peace. Even on his good days, the tranquil existence of an ordinary person was forever beyond his reach. What kept Tsway Boo-qoo going through this torment? This Xiaolu didn't understand. If Tsway Boo-qoo was doing everything for the sake of others, how was he able to hold on? It was a question he had always wanted Tsway Boo-qoo to answer. After all, their situations were almost identical, to the point that even now they appeared as eerie mirrors of each other. When Tsway Boo-qoo replied, his voice was very quiet. I know. Had it not been for Xiaolu's extraordinary hearing, he might have missed those words within the stillness of the cave. Tsway Boo-qoo succumbed to another long fit of coughing. Xiaolu could almost picture him, hunched over, the coughs wrenching his body as he thought he was about to expel his very heart and lungs through his mouth. Tsway Boo-qoo's life was like a guttering candle flame, poised to extinguish itself at any moment. Occasionally it flared brighter, but that was merely a fleeting illusion, a final blinding spark before inevitable death. Unless heaven granted him some miracle. But that was impossible. He used every ounce of strength in his body to draw in his next breath, then his next, struggling against the searing pain in his chest as he clung to consciousness. Within the vast expanse of darkness and treachery, one person rose in his mind's eye. Someone born with privilege, untouched by hardship, and graced with both striking beauty and a flamboyant personality. Thanks to this man, Tsway Boo-qoo had discovered the true meaning of living in the sunlight. Oh, each time he drew near, Tsway Boo-qoo felt a step closer to the exhilarating world of life, even if that man was neither gentle nor kind and challenged him at every turn. He often found himself diverting his attention to deal with the traps this man set for him. It was a constant irritation, yet it breathed life into his days. Of course, he'd never share these thoughts with him. That man would spend the rest of his life gloating and rubbing it in his face. For the sake of his ears, it was better to say nothing. He didn't know how long he drifted like this until the pain subsided long enough for him to prop himself on his elbows. He laboriously pulled out a torch and lit it. In the dim light, all he could see clearly was the ground beneath them, riddled with deep cracks. At first glance, it appeared the earth had fractured in some violent tremor, but a closer look revealed a more sinister origin. The cracks seemed alive, overlapping and swirling in an unending pattern. Even a brief glimpse left him dizzy and on the verge of collapse in his current state. He steadied himself and averted his eyes. He could barely hold himself up as it was. There's an array on the ground. He coughed again. How much do you know about the labyrinth? Xiaolu didn't respond. It struck Tsway Boo-qoo that Xiaolu had been silent for some time now. Xiaolu? Came a low grunt. Tsway Boo-qoo frowned. Are you all right? If something happened to Xiaolu, it would be even harder to escape. I've been poisoned. Xiaolu's sigh floated over, so light Tsway Boo-qoo at first suspected he was lying. He paused. How were you poisoned? When we fell, there was poison on the walls. If you doubt me, come look for yourself. Tsway Boo-qoo was silent. Xiaolu laughed. What? You still think I'm lying to you at a time like this? You know I'm dying, said Tsway Boo-qoo flatly. It's taking all my strength just to talk to you. Xiaolu sighed once more. Slowly, he rose to his feet and approached Tsway Boo-qoo. They had fallen a little distance apart. He trod carefully, feeling his way forward with each step. A sharp hiss erupted from the ground. Tsway Boo-qoo raised his torch to see Xiaolu leap up as spikes shot from the stone beneath his feet. Dodging the spikes should have posed no problem for Xiaolu, yet Tsway Boo-qoo could see a sluggishness to his movements, which were nowhere near as fluid as before. Xiaolu evaded the spikes by a hair's breadth, narrowly avoiding being turned into a meat skewer. He arrived at Tsway Boo-qoo's side and slowly settled down on the floor. His breathing was labored and shallow. He stretched out his hand. In the flickering light, Tsway Boo-qoo could see the red and purple splotches on Xiaolu's palm. Some were already beginning to turn black. Stunned, Tsway Boo-qoo suddenly recalled how Xiaolu had pulled him away from the jade pillar. When they'd fallen, he must have pushed off the wall with his palm. Why didn't you expel the poison? Xiaolu sighed. Because I'm already suffering from another, deeper poison. He used his blackening hand to roll up the sleeve of his other arm. A shriveled, twig-like arm emerged, emaciated and wrinkled, and as slender as a chopstick. Though Tsway Boo-qoo had seen it before, It sent a chill down his spine. An arm like that shouldn't belong to a living person, especially not a man like Xiao. But that wasn't what Xiao wanted to show him. He continued to roll up his sleeve. Where his withered arm gradually thickened and transitioned to healthy flesh, the skin was tinged with sickly purple-black. What is it? The poison I was born with. My martial training kept it suppressed over the years, but during my last fight with Feng Xiao, I sustained severe injuries and almost entered qi deviation. You must have sensed my injuries have yet to fully heal. My martial arts skills have only recovered to around 6 or 7/10 of their original state. I can no longer suppress the poison. The first poison had already begun to spread, and now Xiao had been exposed to another. It was remarkable he'd avoided the spikes at all. What's the worst-case scenario? Xiao smiled. This is the worst-case scenario. There's only one road available to me. Death. You could have chosen not to create this mess and concentrated on recovering instead, said Tsway Boo-qoo coldly. It's too late for that, said Xiao. After my seclusion failed, I had no illusions about the condition I was in. I couldn't break through in my martial arts, and the poison had already spread. I can't advance any further. No matter what I do, only death awaits me now. The best I can do is make sure my years of planning come to fruition before I pass away. I can fulfill my lifelong wish. Tsway Boo-qoo sneered. Your lifelong wish is to harm others. Xiao began to cough. Perhaps the poison was acting up. He didn't respond to Tsway Boo-qoo, but instead closed his eyes and began meditating to regulate his breathing. Tsway Boo-qoo tossed him a porcelain vial, which he caught with a steady hand. Ice fungus pills, said Tsway Boo-qoo. They'll slow the spread of your poison. If you doubt me, you don't have to take them. Xiao opened the vial, sniffed its contents, and tilted his head back, emptying all the pills into his mouth. They were in the same boat. There was no reason to suspect each other. Soon enough, Xiao did feel stronger. Your medicine is quite effective. Enough. Let's get out of here. Xiao took the torch from his hand and pulled out a long needle. He pierced the slim torch with it, then tossed it into the darkness. The needle arced through the air with the torch attached, then embedded itself in the stone wall on the opposite side of the cavern. Before the light snuffed out, both Tsway Boo-qoo and Xiao caught a glimpse of the general shape of their surroundings. Their faces showed identical expressions of disbelief. Feng Xiao and Too-ahn Qinghe had been fighting for nearly half an hour. Neither could kill the other. Even injuring their opponent was proving difficult. Too-ahn Qinghe had quickly realized that Feng Xiao's martial arts had grown even more refined since their fight the previous night on Chang'an Street. He was discomfited. Martial arts depended not only on natural talent and a strong foundation of training, but also on sudden, spontaneous leaps in insight. Even mediocre martial artists struggled to make such significant progress in a few days, never mind martial artists of their caliber. Progressing a step, even half a step, was excruciatingly difficult and depended on timing, environment, and fortuitous encounters with mentors or opponents. Yet Feng Xiao had managed it. Either he'd held back during their previous confrontation, or he'd somehow gleaned new insight within the span of a day. How could that be possible? Too-ahn Qinghe cleared his mind of all distractions. He and Feng Xiao were now evenly matched, with the same odds of victory. The victor would therefore be determined through sheer strength. Both noticed someone approaching on the periphery of their battle, but neither paid the newcomer any mind. It was Yihuan, the girl who'd been with Xiao. Instead of pursuing the false Sui emperor alongside Xiao, she'd chosen to remain. Although their speed made it impossible for her to see them clearly, she watched every move they made, rapt. Xiao had taught Yihuan all the martial arts she knew. She was of middling aptitude, but though she could never hope to equal his accomplishments, having an excellent teacher was a great advantage. If she were to wander the Jianghu, she might not climb to the top, but she'd still carve out a place among the upper ranks. She stilled her breathing, minimizing her aura to avoid drawing Feng Xiao's notice. The next time the two men's palms met, Yuwen Yihuan saw her chance. She leapt at Feng Xiao's back, light flashing from her sleeve. Chapter 186. Yuwen Yihuan was determined to succeed. The hidden weapon in her sleeve shone with internal energy as it sliced toward the middle of Feng Xiao's back. She was only 3 inches from Feng Xiao when Too-ahn Qinghe, embroiled in battle with Feng Xiao, suddenly fell back. Feng Xiao spun and floated upward, and the hidden weapon in Yuwen Yihuan's sleeve sliced through empty air. She'd missed. Her eyes widened in disbelief. I won't use underhanded tactics to achieve my victory, Too-ahn Qinghe's cold voice echoed in her ears. She abandoned her attack to evade Feng Xiao's deadly strike. But how could she hope to escape? Sharp pain pierced her back. Yuwen Yihuan's body flew like a kite with its string snapped, crashing heavily to the floor. She'd activated her true qi in time to protect her life, but her organs were damaged, her strength depleted. She raised her head and coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood, chest heaving as she glared at Feng Xiao and Too-ahn Qinghe. Bit by bit, she edged backward. Too-ahn Qinghe! You betrayed my brother! His alliance is with Kuhezhen, not me. Too-ahn Qinghe gazed back at her. His eyes were empty of emotion. He looked at her as one might at a stone or a tree. Feng Xiao raised his hand for a finishing blow. I know what Kuhezhen planted beneath the temple, Yuwen Yihuan shouted. If you want to save Tsway Boo-qoo, spare my life. Feng Xiao froze. Seizing her chance, she sliced open her brow and shoved a black worm into the bloody wound. She turned and leapt unhesitatingly into the pit below, moving so fast even Feng Xiao was a heartbeat behind. He jumped unthinkingly after her. Wait! Too-ahn Qinghe's expression shifted. He hadn't contributed to Kuhezhen's refashioning of the labyrinth, but he was aware of the effort the prince had put into it. Kuhezhen had hoped to lure everyone to their deaths inside. Even their souls would be trapped for all eternity. Too-ahn Qinghe couldn't bear to watch Feng Xiao go to his death. To him, Feng Xiao was a rare and precious thing, a truly worthy opponent. Enemies could be found anywhere, but an opponent like this should be cherished. By the time he cried out, Feng Xiao had already disappeared from sight. Too-ahn Qinghe's expression flickered through myriad of emotions before setting itself in determination. He leapt after him. The light of the torch had flashed, then faded, revealing an indistinct scene. Not far from Tsway Boo-qoo and Xiao was a low bronze dais. Atop it, a bronze pillar crawling with intricate carvings stretched toward the ceiling. The torch had flown too fast for them to see much more than that. They'd had time to register only one additional thing. At the foot of the pillar, thousands of bones piled up like small hills. Long since stripped of their original color, they appeared gray and black, shocking in their sheer quantity. Da-Xing-shan Temple was a site of Buddhist worship. How could there be so many bones here? No matter how extraordinary Kuhezhen might be, he couldn't possibly create that many corpses in just a few days. The ground they stood upon had been part of the capital for many dynasties. An ossuary this size was inconceivable, unless the labyrinth was far older than any of them had imagined. All around the bronze platform, countless cracks snaked across the ground, extending beneath Tsway Boo-qoo and Xiao's feet. This place must have been an altar of the ancients, Xiao hazarded. Maybe it sank due to the ground caving in, or maybe it was originally built underground. Either way, it was lost to time, leaving future generations unaware of its existence. The temple must have been constructed later. Or perhaps the first abbot of the temple knew of its existence and built the temple here to suppress evil through compassion. Tsway Boo-qoo said, We can speculate later. We need to figure out how to get out of here. Xiao smiled wryly. Don't expect too much from me. I'm not much better off than you. I'll be lucky to make it out on my own, let alone bring you with me. Tsway Boo-qoo coughed. But you are cleverer than most. That's enough. If I go insane in a moment, remember to return me to my senses. All right, said Xiao. Tsway Boo-qoo lit another torch. He pushed down his nausea and dizziness and stared down at the cracks on the ground. The lines radiated outward in ripple-like patterns. Each ring was perfectly aligned, and none overlapped. The pattern had an allure like shimmering water magnified, drawing the eye to it again and again. As he watched, the cracks began to move like living things. They rose from the ground, the chaotic pattern ordering itself until the many fissures slowly converged into a familiar object. Although Tsway Boo-qoo had encountered it only a few times, he knew it well. The Jade of Heaven Lake. If there was anything in the world capable of reversing his fate and prolonging his life, it was this legendary jade. But this priceless, one-of-a-kind treasure had already been consumed by Xiao. Could there be a second one? It wasn't impossible. This labyrinth had a history that far predated Da Xingshan Temple. If one of the ancients had hidden a treasure here, perhaps it had remained undiscovered all this time. The translucent stone shimmered with an inner light, green shading toward blue, like the reflection of the starry sky glinting within a tranquil lake. Its vibrant glow caught and captivated the eye. Even the most resolute man would struggle to resist the allure of such a wonder. Tsway Boo-qoo stared intently at the Jade of Heaven Lake. He closed his eyes, then opened them. His nails bit hard into his palms. Yet the jade did not disappear. It hovered quietly, just within reach. Tsway Boo-qoo's fingers twitched toward the jade. With this, he wouldn't need to worry about dying. He might even enjoy decades more. Even if his health remained poor, he'd be alive. And as long as he lived, there was hope. He could continue basking in the sun's warmth, plotting against Feng Xiao and gloating over his victories. He could protect more people like his mother, those who were kind and vulnerable, because he was Tsway Boo-qoo, hard-hearted and ruthless. His fingertips were a breath away from the stone. Alarm rose in his heart, a jangling sense of wrongness. Tsway Boo-qoo couldn't say what prompted it, only that it was like an invisible thread tied around his finger, tugging him to a stop for a brief moment. He bit his tongue, and the sharp tang of blood surged into his mouth, bringing a sudden clarity amid the pain. He realized there was no Jade of Heaven Lake in front of him. His hand hovered before a venomous snake, head reared and staring at him with glowing green eyes. Its tongue flicked in and out as it waited for him to deliver himself into its venomous jaws. Tsway Boo-qoo froze. The snake remained motionless too, as if waiting to see who would falter first. Tsway Boo-qoo eased a hand into his lapels. Lightning fast, the snake struck. Tsway Boo-qoo flung out his hand. The snake hissed and twisted away mid-lunge, wary of the Realgar powder Tsway Boo-qoo had thrown. He had made thorough preparations before entering the labyrinth. He and Jiang Xuan were carrying sachets of Realgar, effective at warding off most ordinary snakes and insects. Clearly, the sachet was insufficient against a venomous snake over a century old. Exercising the utmost caution, Tsway Boo-qoo had tasked Deputy Chief Song Liang-chun with finding a secret formula. It included Realgar, mugwort, and cinnabar, pure substances full of yang energy that were perfect for countering yin creatures. The venomous snake slithered off into the darkness and vanished from sight. Peril temporarily averted, Tsway Boo-qoo lit the torch again and looked around for Xiao. Tsway Boo-qoo had been caught in danger unawares, yet Xiao hadn't uttered a word of warning. They were sworn nemesis. Xiao would have no issue sitting back and watching him die, but such inaction was exceedingly foolish in their current predicament, and Xiao was no fool. When Tsway Boo-qoo caught sight of him, his face fell. Xiao was a short distance away. At some point, he descended the bronze dais and was now staring at the central pillar. His head was tilted back, his face filled with longing. The winding pattern on the pillar now became clear. What they had taken for intricate carvings were instead countless snakes coiled around the bronze surface. Some reared and flicked their tongues, while others twined around each other as they slithered in circles. Their scales glinted in the torchlight, sending shivers down Tsway Boo-qoo's spine. Yet Xiao seemed completely oblivious as he approached the pillar. Xiao! Tsway Boo-qoo rushed forward and felt his foot sink as he trod on a hidden trigger buried in the fissures on the ground. The air instantly filled with the whistle of arrows. There was nowhere to run or hide, and Tsway Boo-qoo's reactions were too slow to evade. The arrows were inches from them as he grabbed Xiaolu's arm. The moment he touched him, Xiaolu shuddered violently and spun, snatching Tsway Boo-qoo and leaping into the air. Tsway Boo-qoo's feet left the ground just as the arrows shot through the space he'd occupied a heartbeat ago. They whizzed past, grazing his clothes and shoes. One tore the fabric at his shoulder, missing his skin by a whisper. Xiaolu released him, and the two collapsed to the ground in an ungainly heap. Xiaolu's breathing was heavy. It was clear he no longer had the strength to carry Tsway Boo-qoo. A few snakes on the pillar died under the rain of arrows, nailed to the bronze surface. Others, startled, darted in all directions, including toward Tsway Boo-qoo and Xiaolu. There was no time to speak. They struggled to their feet, stumbling as they dashed away. The torch tumbled to the ground, illuminating the cracks below. Tsway Boo-qoo's eyes widened in realization. "Take me with you, but follow my instructions," he cried. Xiaolu didn't hesitate. He seized Tsway Boo-qoo's arm, gathered all his energy, and leapt. With a tap of his toes against the stone, he dodged a wave of snakes below. Up is Tien, down is Kun. To the upper left. Dui, 10 steps. Kan, 6 steps. Jun, 8 steps. Xiaolu was a man of wide and varied knowledge. He understood exactly what Tsway Boo-qoo was doing, calling out directions using the 8 trigrams of the Bagua. Tien, no, not north, it's up, forward, and straight up. The two leapt into the air and landed in a cave concealed in the stone wall. Xiaolu was completely drained of strength. He pressed himself against the wall with no thought of any potential poison. His brow was drenched in sweat, his face as pale as a ghost. Tsway Boo-qoo wasn't much better off, but at least he hadn't been the one using true qi only moments before. After taking a moment to recover his strength, Xiaolu whispered, "How did you know there was a cave here?" "The Yellow River Trigram," Tsway Boo-qoo said. "The array was likely modeled after it. Even if death lies everywhere, where death and life meet, there must be a path out. That's the secret." Closing his eyes, he recalled his vision of the Jade of Heaven Lake. The fissures forming the jade had scattered and rearranged themselves into the shape of this diagram, an ancient cosmological map familiar to anyone who studied geomancy. "I saw a hint within the illusion earlier. Those fissures look random, but if you took each out separately and rearranged them, they'd form the Yellow River diagram." Xiaolu was silent for a moment, then smiled wryly. "You're better at arrays than I am. It seems Fan Yuwen held something back when he taught me." "No," said Tsway Boo-qoo. "He treated you the same as he did me. If anything, you found his favor. He taught you more than me, not less, but your heart wasn't in it." Xiaolu was extraordinarily intelligent and capable, yet he was also ambitious, and ambitious individuals often shared a common flaw. They set their goals unreasonably high. For them, these arts were mere stepping stones. They felt no need to dedicate themselves to such pursuits, so they paid less attention. "You're right." Xiaolu didn't deny it. "What did you see when you looked at that pillar?" Xiaolu paused. "Everything I've ever wanted. Fame, power, an able body, being born into a prosperous family, climbing the ranks on my own merits, seizing the throne and replacing the Emperor of Chun, governing across the Yangtze from your sway, then, finally, achieving my goal of unifying the land." "Your obsession runs too deep," said Tsway Boo-qoo coldly. He had no interest in conversing further. When he felt somewhat recovered, he rose to observe his surroundings. The cave they had landed in was clean but very small, with hardly any room to move around. One side was open and dropped down to the bronze dais. The remaining 3 sides were solid stone. One in particular was suspiciously smooth, suggesting it was the work of human excavation. Tsway Boo-qoo crouched down, running his fingers along the base of the wall until he found a narrow crack that confirmed his suspicions. This wall wasn't naturally formed. It was a man-made stone door. Groping blindly, he located the trigger, a stone ball, which he pushed into the corner. With a rumble, the stone door slowly began to rise. Tsway Boo-qoo realized his companion had gone still. "Xiaolu, I fear I won't be leaving this place, Xiao said calmly. If I can, said Tsway Boo-qoo, so can you. In this at least, I'm not like you. The poison has seeped into my bones. Even the Jade of Heaven Lake's essence I absorbed is useless. What will you do? I cannot escape death. Perhaps it's better if I pass the Jade of Heaven Lake's essence on to you. You still have a glimmer of hope. The Xiao I know would never give up until the final moment. For me, this is the final moment. Carrying you here exhausted the last of my strength. I can't even stand. My legs are numb. Xiao smiled. There's just one problem. My body is full of poison. I can't guarantee you won't be poisoned as well if I transfer the essence to you. Tsway Boo-qoo frowned. Tsway Boo-qoo, said Xiao, do you dare take a gamble? Chapter 187. When Xiao wished to, he could give anyone he spoke with the impression that they were bathed in a gentle spring breeze. He felt instantly familiar, like they'd found the other half of their soul. Even Tsway Boo-qoo was not immune. Xiao was an extraordinarily proud man, unable to tolerate the slightest imperfection or flaw. Yet ironically, the first half of his life had been filled with imperfections. He was born into a noble family, but their authority had waned. He was learned and knowledgeable, but found himself serving an incompetent emperor and unable to receive his favor. His gifts were extraordinary, an exceptional memory and martial talent the likes of which appeared once a century. But he was born with poison coursing through his veins, and though he possessed powerful internal cultivation, much of it was consumed suppressing the toxins in his own body. His original plan had been to infiltrate the southern dynasty from within. It was his own territory, after all, and the Emperor of Chun was weak. The lines of power within the southern dynasty were tangled and interwoven, and thus easy to exploit. But the appearance of Yuwen Yihuan had altered his view. At the time, the northern Zhou dynasty was still thriving. As the daughter of the crown prince, the infant girl was destined to become an emperor's daughter. She'd been left for dead, but she was the twin sister of the crown prince's living child. Her status was both delicate and extremely useful. Xiao covertly gathered his forces and worked for years until he finally created a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The 3 days of the Lantern Festival and the solar eclipse, Zhengyi and Liu Feng's deaths, the massacre at the Prince of Qing's mansion, the Buddhist ceremony at Daxing Temple. The stars aligned. The right time, the right place, and the right people. His victory had seemed assured. Yet in just a few hours, everything had unraveled. Had Tsway Boo-qoo's group not obstructed him, had his co-conspirator Kuhezhen not betrayed him, had he not pursued perfection and tried to eliminate the Emperor of Tsway first, perhaps he'd have succeeded in changing the world. But it was too late for what-ifs. Xiao had always understood that the path he walked was as steep as a 1,000-foot cliff. No other road was available to him. He'd exhausted himself for years plotting and planning, yet ultimately, he hadn't been able to outrun his own death. The idea of changing one's fate was a joke. Xiao closed his eyes, seeing his whole life flit by in a blink. A sense of futility washed over him. I won't gamble, said Tsway Boo-qoo. Xiao smiled. You're afraid? Yes, I'm afraid, Tsway Boo-qoo said flatly. He didn't explain, but Xiao saw through him. Tsway Boo-qoo, I thought you understood better than anyone how to seize the moment. You burn all paths of retreat in your resolve to press forward. Yet right now, cornered as you are, you refuse to take this step. Why? His question was met with silence. Xiao chuckled. You have attachments, considerations. You're afraid if you accept my proposal, you'll never leave here. And there's someone you still wish to see, isn't there? Tsway Boo-qoo acted like he hadn't heard. Xiao, you often say we're alike. Indeed, our experiences and talents bear a great resemblance. We even both took Feng as our teacher. But I have no desire to overturn the world or usurp the throne, and even less to gamble on a fleeting hope. He added coldly, if you still have the energy to say all this, get up and look for a way out. Xiao sighed. If there is hope, what does it matter if it's fleeting? Escaping this place will tax you beyond what you can bear. Without taking the chance I'm offering you, you won't get far. The situation was indeed dire for Tsway Boo-qoo. Although his expression remained placid and his tone moderate, it was only because he was used to suppressing his pain. If not for the stone wall supporting him, he probably wouldn't have been able to sit up at all. Each exhale felt like he was breathing out fire, scorching his heart and lungs, and the cold, damp air of the cavern aggravated his agony. It was as if fire and ice were warring inside him. Tsway Boo-qoo endured and endured, but eventually he could endure no longer. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Xiao narrowed his eyes. His sight was fading, but in the torchlight he could vaguely make out the crimson splatter on the ground. He still had enough left in him to tease Tsway Boo-qoo. I didn't expect that after all our time fighting, we'd end up dying together. Perhaps we'll meet again in the next life. Tsway Boo-qoo sneered. I don't want to see Pavilion Leader Xiao ever again. Please die a little farther away so I can have peace. The flame in his hand flickered out, plunging them into darkness once more. Just before the light faded, Tsway Boo-qoo saw what lay behind the stone door. A corridor, its stone walls lined with candle holders. This, too, must belong to the labyrinth. If there were holders for candles, someone must have once used this path to cut through the maze. It might just lead them out, provided there were no traps along the way. He exhaled a breath of stale air. With great effort, he propped himself onto his elbow, then slowly climbed to his feet. Even if Xiao couldn't move, Tsway Boo-qoo had to keep going. Don't leave. Stay here with me, Xiao called from behind him. His words were like an invisible shackle, locking around Tsway Boo-qoo's ankle and preventing him from taking another step. Tsway Boo-qoo was exhausted. His broken body was strained to its limit, yet he'd dragged it along, lingering at death's door year after year. It took enormous willpower simply to command his body to walk and talk, to force it to keep up with his mind. But it forever lagged behind, heavy and sluggish. Tsway Boo-qoo, you're trying so hard to leave this place. If the person you want to see doesn't want to see you, what will you do? You've lived a life of agony. You spent your days lost in pain and suffering. And for what? You refuse to pursue the most glorious position for yourself. Why not die here with me? At least then I won't be lonely in the underworld. Behind him, Xiao hunched over, racked by coughs. He laughed as he coughed, and coughed as he laughed. Tsway Boo-qoo didn't look back or respond. He continued to inch forward, step by laborious step. He crossed the threshold of the stone door and entered the passageway. Darkness enveloped him, as if he'd fallen into a bottomless abyss or sunk into the depths of hell. Only the pain in his limbs reminded him he was still alive. A soft wind blew across the back of his neck. Tsway Boo-qoo couldn't evade as a cold hand gripped his neck. You don't wish to die with me, but I wish to die with you, Xiao murmured. He tapped Tsway Boo-qoo's acupoint, and his hand slid down from his nape to press firmly against his back. Tsway Boo-qoo, even if you refuse to gamble, I still want to make a wager with you. Tsway Boo-qoo was unable to speak or move, unable to struggle. Cold, stagnant air washed over him, untouched by the sun for centuries. Yet, as Xiao's hand pressed into his back, it felt as if he'd thrust a fragment of sun into his body. His bones were instantly incinerated by that searing light. The clash between ice and fire, a relentless torment with no respite. A hook seemed to be stirring and clawing at his flesh, as if trying to tear him apart and rebuild him anew. Scalding waves of heat churned around him, yet failed to dissolve the bone-piercing chill. Neither side was willing to relent until the other was consumed, locked in a stalemate with Tsway Boo-qoo's body as the battleground. How could a mortal body withstand such torture? He was already painfully fragile, unable to weather such an intense shock. The slightest push, and it would splinter into thousands of pieces, never to be whole again. Tsway Boo-qoo forced his eyes open a crack and gazed vacantly into the void ahead. His lips parted as if to moan, but no sound escaped. When the pain reached its peak, his consciousness, his very soul, could no longer bear it. It struggled free of the confines of his body and started to rise toward the heavens. Just a little further and he would be free. Never again would he be shackled by this suffering. He'd taken revenge for his birth mother, and the Tsway Bureau had Jiang Sun and Song Liang-chung. There was no need for him to regret or worry. The world was full of brilliant men. The court would surely find a new chief to take his place at the Tsway Bureau. As for this case, his last, he and Xiao would be buried within the labyrinth forever, their corpses rotting and becoming one with the earth. In a few months, they'd be unrecognizable piles of bones, nameless and forgotten. All grievances and enmities would fade, vanishing like smoke. All obsessions were but illusions. A voice lingered in his ears, soft and poisonous. "Wouldn't it be nice to stay here quietly? You'll have me as your opponent. You won't be lonely even in the underworld." Tsway Boo-qoo felt as if he was walking in a daze, pulled along by an unseen guide. He passed under a stone gate and traversed a long corridor where time seemed to stand still. The agonizing sensations of burning heat and freezing ice evaporated, leaving his body weightless. Even the sensation of his feet pressing into the floor as he walked seemed to have faded away. He couldn't remember having ever felt so light and carefree. It was a feeling he'd scarcely dared to dream of. Tsway Boo-qoo had never imagined there'd come a time when he could feel like an ordinary person. No, he was even more comfortable than an ordinary person. If he kept going like this, it wouldn't be long before... Yet even as that force pulled him inexorably forward, he found himself resisting its tug. Deep down, he felt like there was something he had forgotten, something of great importance. He looked around in confusion, then lowered his head again. Whatever it was, he couldn't recall it. The force continued to draw him onward, step by step. A nagging, anxious feeling bubbled up within him. What was it that he couldn't remember? Something slipped from his lapels and fell to the ground. Stone struck stone with a crisp, ringing sound, jolting his hazy mind back to clarity. It looked like a piece of jade. The recollection came to him sluggishly. One night, after returning to the capital, perhaps it had been during the Lantern Festival, he'd gone to the East Market for an appointment. He'd seen this piece of jade as he passed a shop and bought it on impulse. On the piece of jade was carved. He furrowed his brow, straining his memory for every detail. A phoenix. The phoenix had been vivid and bursting with life, its head proudly raised, ready to soar into the 9 heavens. When he looked at it, he felt it bore an uncanny resemblance to someone. Tsway Boo-qoo trembled. He stopped, refusing to take another step no matter how much the force tugged and pulled. There was something he'd yet to do. There was someone he needed to see. He couldn't leave. He didn't want to die. He wanted to live. With that thought, the tide of pain came crashing back in, crashing over him from all directions. It surged and roiled with no end in sight. In his half-conscious stupor, Tsway Boo-qoo didn't notice the blood oozing from the corners of his mouth, nor the uncontrollable way his body shivered and twitched. He didn't notice that behind him, Xiao was now emaciated and gaunt, frail and gray-haired. His left hand on Tsway Boo-qoo's back was no longer smooth and slender. It was wrinkled and withered, as starkly white as bone. A mouthful of blood spattered on Tsway Boo-qoo's shoulder. At last, Xiao loosened his grip and slumped to one side. He didn't even have the strength to open his eyes and glance at the darkened world around him. He'd once believed he would never accept this, but now an uncanny tranquility enveloped him, as if all the dust of the mortal world had settled around him. This wasn't a bad place to die. An underground labyrinth for holding Buddhist sarira. At least it wasn't filthy and unclean. It was only a pity he had finally lost to fate. Xiao's lips curved, pulling at the dried and shriveled skin of his face. The vitality he'd once possessed was gone as if it had never been. Even those who knew him best might not have recognized him. His gaze shifted from the distant, empty void to Tsway Boo-qoo before him. "Tsway Boo-qoo, I wish you luck. If you don't make it, come keep me company in death. We can duel to our heart's content in the underworld." Dazed, Tsway Boo-qoo only vaguely heard him. He could no longer tell what was hallucination and what was reality, just as he couldn't tell if his spirit had left his body. He didn't know if he still remained in the mortal realm. A powerful force from the underworld yearned to tear his soul away. His spirit warred fiercely with his body, neither side willing to concede. He drifted in a strange and boundless darkness, clinging to his last shred of clarity as a shield against the outside forces that would take him. He fought them, inching step by step back down the path he'd come. He didn't know how much time passed before he gradually became aware that he was waking up in his flesh and blood body. The agony had grown more intense. This time, it wasn't just his body. His head also ached. He felt as if a hand had reached into the tranquil pond that was his mind and stirred. He let out a soft sigh. The sound traveled down the passageway, bouncing off the walls and echoing over and over. With great effort, he opened his eyes. All he saw was darkness. Yet he keenly sensed that there was no longer anyone beside him. Xiao Lu. There was no response. Before long, he heard the sound of hurried and erratic footsteps in the distance. This person was unsteady on their feet, stumbling as they ran, at times light and at other times lumbering. Who could it be? The Emperor of Tsway? Jiangsuan? Or was it Kuhezhen's human goo? It could also be Feng Xiao or Too-ahn Qinghe, a friend or foe. He lacked the strength to move even an inch. The footsteps drew nearer. The newcomer carried a light, which bounced up and down in time with their steps. A moment later, it resolved into a blurred figure holding a torch. It was a girl. Tsway Boo-qoo frowned. In his confusion, he took her for Xiao before remembering he had sent Xiao away. She couldn't possibly be here. It wasn't Xiao, nor was it Qing Miaoyu. Then who? He soon received his answer. The girl stopped, panting harshly in the dim light, her beautiful and delicate features twisted with an incongruous savagery. A vertical gash marred her once lovely forehead. The edges curled outward like a wound inflicted by a knife. Blood trickled down the bridge of her nose, leaving rusty streaks where it dried. Her forehead around the wound seemed to pulse, as if some living thing lurked beneath her skin. Yuwen and Yihuan stared blankly at Tsway Boo-qoo, then turned her gaze to the space beside him. Only then did Tsway Boo-qoo see Xiao, silent and still. Xiao! Tears mixed with blood streamed from Yuwen and Yihuan's eyes. She fell to her knees and pulled Xiao into her arms, unafraid of his withered and aged corpse. Why didn't you wait for me? The girl screamed silently. Her eyes shone with a lifetime's worth of sorrow. To her, Xiao was everything. He was heaven and earth, the entire first half of her life. She'd been born into the imperial family, but never spent a single day as a princess. Princess of Ping, Yuwen-Ying, Yuwen, the Emperor of Tsway, Empress Dugu. These people were all her closest blood kin, yet they couldn't have been more distant from her. Even when she'd followed Xiaolu's orders to approach the princess and her daughter, Yuwen and Yihuan had never seen them as her true family. The only one she trusted unreservedly was Xiao. He taught her to read and write, taught her martial arts and strategy. Although they called themselves siblings, had Xiao asked her to strip and offer up her innocence to him, she'd have done it without hesitation. Unfortunately, Xiao never asked for such a thing. There was no shortage of beautiful women around him, but all his energy was devoted to his grand plans. He'd probably paid more attention to his opponent, Tsway Boo-qoo, than to her. Now his body would never be warm again. Yuwen and Yihuan's tears of blood ran dry. Slowly, she raised her head and glared at Tsway Boo-qoo. He returned her stare with indifference, unafraid. Xiao is dead, she said. So why are you still alive? She gently released Xiao, then pulled a long worm from her brow. Her empty hand stretched toward Tsway Boo-qoo, trailing down his neck and unfastening his collar with a feather-like touch. Look what you did to Xiao. I won't let you die so easily. Your suffering should be greater than his. At least that way he'll have peace in the underworld. She used her nail to score a gash in the skin beneath Tsway Boo-qoo's collarbone, then brought the worm close. It latched on eagerly, sucking at his blood in greedy gulps. She let go, and the worm darted into his flesh, leaving only a small strip of tail exposed. Soon enough, even that disappeared. Yuwen and Yihuan tore open Tsway Boo-qoo's clothing and watched as the worm wriggled slowly beneath the skin of his chest, unable to suppress a smile. Next, I'll remove your heart. But don't worry. With the goo in you, you'll live for a while without it. Perhaps you'll get to feel what it's like to have no heart at all. Her tone was cool and deliberate as she slowly tugged open Tsway Boo-qoo's garments, her expression almost reverent. Tsway Boo-qoo felt like his body had been split into three, a third composed of the familiar pain of his original illness, a third the martial essence Xiao had transferred into his body, and the final third the goo tearing into his flesh. All three fought fiercely for dominance. None were willing to concede. Black blood oozed from Tsway Boo-qoo's lips without cease. His body was at its limit. He could endure no longer. But Yuwen and Yihuan didn't care how much pain he was in. The greater his pain, the happier she became. If Tsway Boo-qoo had been able to speak and describe his current experience to her, she might have clapped in delight. She caressed his chest over his heart, searching for the opportune moment to strike. At last, her lips curled in satisfaction. She sliced open his chest over his sternum, then reached in to rip out his heart. A sword stabbed soundlessly toward her from behind. Yuwen and Yihuan froze, her heart pounding in alarm. The enemy had followed her down the passageway, but she'd only noticed when they were right at her back. This person was a martial artist on par with Xiao in his prime. It was her last thought before the sword pierced her through. Bewilderment filled Yuwen and Yihuan's eyes. From the moment she'd plunged the goo from the ground and welcomed it into her own body, she'd accepted her fate. She knew she was a middling martial artist, so she had to rely on the goo to help Xiao. As a vessel for the worm, she would die the most painful of deaths, but it didn't matter how awful her end would be. Yet her sacrifice had been in vain. By the time she found Xiao, he was already dead. The blood-stained blade was swiftly withdrawn. A kick sent Yuwen and Yihuan flying, and the blade drew a swift arc through the air. Crimson blood splattered the stone walls as her head parted from her body and rolled into the darkness. Tsway Boo-qoo felt an arm wrapped tightly around his waist. Distantly, he heard someone calling his name over and over, their voice laced with fear and urgency. His eyes opened a crack and tried to speak, but he only brought up a mouthful of blood. Above him, Feng Xiao's face came into focus. It was entirely changed. Had the arrogant Deputy Chief Fung ever made this kind of expression before? Tsway Boo-qoo felt an urge to laugh. He managed to say, "Help me remove the goo." Feng Xiao's gaze was fixed on the pulsing movements beneath the skin of Tsway Boo-qoo's chest. He gritted his teeth. "I dare not." He didn't dare. Tsway Boo-qoo wanted to laugh even more. "The two options are life and death. That's all." He closed his eyes and said calmly, "I entrust my life to you. I'll hold no grudge if I die." Feng Xiao's expression shifted, as if he was biting back something he wished to say. He lit a torch and drew a dagger from his sleeve. He held the tip in the flame, then pressed it to Tsway Boo-qoo's chest. Still, he hesitated to make the cut. "Hurry." Tsway Boo-qoo's body twitched as the goo burrowed deeper. He felt his awareness slipping. Feng Xiao dared not wait any longer. He trained his eyes on the undulating patch of skin and struck. The black dot wriggled within the streaming blood, trying to conceal itself. Feng Xiao grasped it firmly and pulled it out. Tsway Boo-qoo's eyes snapped open at the burst of pain. His gaze was unfocused, his face ashen and drenched in sweat. Moving with extraordinary speed, Feng Xiao flung the worm into the torch's fire. Then he gathered Tsway Boo-qoo into his arms and dashed away, leaving Yuwen Yihuan's corpse behind. Tsway Boo-qoo was hazily aware that Feng Xiao was carrying him while sprinting. The arms around him were steady, trying to minimize any jostling. The Fungar he'd met a year ago in Liugong City would certainly not have shown him this much consideration. Tsway Boo-qoo was rather touched. Feeling Tsway Boo-qoo shift slightly, Feng Xiao seemed to think the poison was flaring up again. He screeched to a halt and lowered his head. "What's wrong?" he asked, anxious. "Nothing." As long as Tsway Boo-qoo could endure the pain, he'd dismiss it. Feng Xiao smoothly set him down. "How did you find me?" Tsway Boo-qoo asked. "I tracked Yuwen Yihuan. That girl would have become an enormous problem if not eliminated. I didn't expect to find her with you." He and Too-ahn Qinghe had both ended up in the labyrinth. Feng Xiao chasing Yuwen Yihuan and Too-ahn Qinghe chasing Feng Xiao. They'd fought again, but the collapse of the labyrinth had separated them. Feng Xiao had wandered around the altars and nearly perished several times. Fortunately, his incredible martial arts allowed him to overcome each and every crisis. At the same time, Jiang Suan had been fleeing the human goo with the emperor in tow when they ran into Too-ahn Qinghe. The human goo had no power to differentiate between friend and foe. It didn't spare Too-ahn Qinghe simply because he was on Kuhezhen's side. After the monster's terrifying pursuit, the appearance of Too-ahn Qinghe had given Jiang Suan the chance to slip away. "I met them just up ahead. Jiang Suan found an exit, so I had him take the emperor out first while I came to look for you. Instead, I found Yuwen Yihuan." Feng Xiao spoke quickly as he described what had happened. He glossed over all the dangers. He knew if he mentioned them, Tsway Boo-qoo would ask more questions, and if Tsway Boo-qoo asked, he had to answer. But he didn't want to waste any time. Tsway Boo-qoo had seen many sides of Feng Xiao, but he'd never seen him so panicked and flustered. So Too-ahn Qinghe is still here, and alive. Hopefully the human goo catches up to him and they destroy each other. Best if he never appears before me again. Tsway Boo-qoo gave a small smile. "I fear your wish won't come true." A man had appeared at the entrance of the passage. The lantern in his hand swayed as he steadily made his way closer. If Too-ahn Qinghe could perish at the hands of a human goo, he wouldn't have deserved his reputation. Feng Xiao sighed. So persistent. But he didn't rush to confront their new adversary. Instead, he pulled out a jade pendant and held it in front of Tsway Boo-qoo. "You dropped this." Tsway Boo-qoo glanced at the phoenix carved into the jade. He shook his head. "It's not mine." "Then whose is it?" "Perhaps it was Yuwen Yihuan's," said Tsway Boo-qoo flatly. Feng Xiao was so angry he could laugh. "Would it kill you to speak the truth just once?" "Well," said Tsway Boo-qoo, "maybe. I really am about to die." Okay. Feng Xiao froze. Tsway Boo-qoo took the opportunity to change the subject. "However, if you defeat Too-ahn Qinghe, perhaps I'll tell you the truth you wish to hear. In that case, you had better still be alive to talk to me when I return." "I'll do my best," Tsway Boo-qoo said sincerely. Feng Xiao lowered his head to kiss him. And this time, Tsway Boo-qoo didn't resist. Perhaps he'd exhausted all his energy. He simply leaned against the stone wall for support and raised his chin, letting Feng Xiao take as he pleased. After a moment, they parted. Feng Xiao tucked away the jade pendant and strode toward Too-ahn Qinghe. Tsway Boo-qoo watched him go, then slowly closed his eyes. Too-ahn Qinghe hadn't moved. He bent and set the lantern on the floor. "If possible, I wish our battle to take place above ground." Feng Xiao rolled his eyes. "You think I want to fight you down here?" Too-ahn Qinghe gave him a serious nod. "Since this battle is unavoidable, let victory depend on our skills." Feng Xiao snorted. Then he dashed toward Too-ahn Qinghe, swift as lightning. In an instant, their figures intertwined. One wielded a saber, the other zither strings. Too-ahn Qinghe's dazzling saber glare rolled out and engulfed his opponent. Feng Xiao's sleeves billowed. He looked vulnerable, even frail, surrounded by the saber chief's tremendous might, as if he might collapse at any moment. But then the string shot out from his sleeves and shattered the saber chi. Too-ahn Qinghe changed tactics. He leapt into the air and swung his sword again, and his saber glare descended like roiling thunderclouds. Feng Xiao unsheathed the whip sword at his waist. With a flick of his wrist, he infused the thin, flexible blade with true qi. It turned cold and hard, swathed in a chilling aura. The saber glare closed in, relentless as a fierce tiger leapt down from the mountain to catch its prey. Its chi swelled like thunderclouds low on the horizon, rolling in to crush all of heaven and earth. Even Tsway Boo-qoo could feel the dense sweep of bloodlust from where he was sitting. Endless and indefatigable, it sent a chill shivering through him. He'd never witnessed the splendid martial arts of Hulagu before he died, but he'd heard Fan Yuwen speak of them. Fan Yuwen had even demonstrated a couple of moves for him. While the imitation couldn't hold a candle to the original, it had been enough for Tsway Boo-qoo to glimpse the deadly and overwhelming power of the foremost master of his day. Too-ahn Qinghe, who'd never set foot in the Central Plains, displayed a martial style inspired by Hulagu's, yet also distinctly his own. He'd spent years training in the snowy mountains of his homeland. All he thought of and cared about was martial arts, and this unadulterated devotion to his craft lent his skills an incredible purity. Though he lacked Hulagu's crushing power, his moves had an almost transcendental quality. Given enough time, he was certain to surpass Hulagu and become a grand master of his generation. But that was a tale for a far future. Today, the opponent in front of him was in no way his inferior. Though Feng Xiao rarely set foot in the Jianghu, he too was a gifted genius. Only recently he survived a chi deviation and taken his martial arts to new heights. Yet this pulse-pounding, tumultuous battle had no witness other than Tsway Boo-qoo. It was a pity, in a way. Even Feng Xiao wasn't sure he could prevail. He and Too-ahn Qinghe were almost equal in strength. They had the same odds of winning. Any tiny, imperceptible mistake would mean defeat. But he couldn't afford to lose, because there was someone behind him. The tidal wave of saber glares crashed over Feng Xiao, who stood unmoving. He didn't rush to dodge or counter. He didn't yet know his opponent's whereabouts. A sea of saber glares engulfed his vision, most of them mere afterimages. But the real saber glares were hidden within the fakes, and if he failed to distinguish them, he might find the next slash scored into his flesh. Feng Xiao leapt into the air. He swung his sword, and his blade and body became one. Together, he and the sword pierced through the saber glares. The passageway exploded with light. Two figures parted in midair and landed on protruding rocks in the cliff face. A long gash stretched from Too-ahn Qinghe's right shoulder to the left side of his abdomen, weeping blood. Feng Xiao's arm was a mess of cuts beneath a crimson-soaked sleeve. Both their faces had paled. They were both suffering from more than trivial injuries. If they continued, they would continue to wound each other like this until they both died together. It was the only possible conclusion. Feng Xiao didn't want to die here. He still had to bring Tsway Boo-qoo out of the labyrinth, but he didn't say so out loud. Instead, he said, "Your heart is elsewhere. It is not in this battle." Too-ahn Qinghe's eyes widened. It seemed Feng Xiao had hit the mark. "Why don't we postpone this fight to another day?" His opponent seemed to consider this. "When?" 3 years from today. In 3 years, I'll meet you at Jin Peak on Mount Ume." Too-ahn Qinghe turned and left. His only answer. In the blink of an eye, he'd vanished into the darkness. It had been obvious something was worrying him. Even now, he was in a desperate hurry. He hadn't even bothered to staunch his bleeding. Feng Xiao slanted a glance at the spot where Too-ahn Qinghe had been standing earlier. Yuwen Yihuan's corpse still lay sprawled on the ground nearby, and in an instant, Feng Xiao understood. He had no time to consider it. He strode quickly over to Tsway Boo-qoo, then bent down, helping him up as gently as possible. He couldn't resist brushing a hand over Tsway Boo-qoo's chest. When he felt a faint flutter of warmth there, he unconsciously relaxed. "I'll carry you out, all right?" he whispered. Tsway Boo-qoo twitched. He glanced at Feng Xiao before closing his eyes once more and nodding. Feng Xiao pulled Tsway Boo-qoo onto his back. He started to walk, pausing after each step. His progress was slow but very steady. "Promise me you'll still be awake when we leave the labyrinth." A moment passed, or perhaps it was many moments. Finally, Feng Xiao heard a faint sigh from behind him. "I promise." Tsway Boo-qoo didn't make promises easily, and when he did, he always kept them. But Feng Xiao felt no relief. Instead, he grew even more tense. No one understood Tsway Boo-qoo's desire to survive better than Feng Xiao. Yet there was also no one who better understood the extent of his injuries. Even if Tsway Boo-qoo wanted to live, how could his body possibly weather such severe harm? Feng Xiao could seek out the best physicians in the world, but Tsway Boo-qoo first had to make it out of the labyrinth. "If you keep your promise," Feng Xiao said, "I'll tell you something." "Tsway Boo-qoo, I like you. If you live, I'll deign to stay by your side for a lifetime. If you die, even if the Zoya Bureau buries you, I will dig up your grave and scatter your bones. I will ensure your soul cannot rest and will never reincarnate. Feng Xiao's voice was icy, cold enough to freeze a person solid. Yet Tsway Boo-qoo smiled. Whether it was the martial power Xiao had transferred, the essence of the Jade of Heaven Lake, or the two poisons neutralizing each other within his body, he'd already persevered through the greatest agony. The pain was no longer so unbearable. But he had no intention of telling Feng Xiao just yet. He'd even been given the chance to admire Deputy Chief Feng's confession and submission, so of course he would take it. At most, once they escaped from here, he'd forego setting a trap for him just this once. That was good enough. End of main story. Oh, okay. Wow. Ouch. Oh, my side hurts so much, but oh man. Well, you guys, we made it to the end of the main story, and I don't even know where to begin with my thoughts. Okay, I'm going to try to figure this out. So, of course, we have chapter 184 with the Emperor stumbling upon Jiangsu Bodhi and Tsway Boo-qoo, which was nice and all, but shortly after that, things did not go well. They ended up getting separated. At least it felt that way, and they encountered some troubles, and Tsway Boo-qoo ended up having to be left behind to preserve the life of the Emperor. Jiangsu and Bodhi dragged the Emperor, and they left. And of course, that weird creature came, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, y'all. Anyway, that weird creature had come, and that was the reason they ended up getting separated. So just first off, that creature sounds horrifying. I don't want to see it. But now we know for sure it was not those underground monkeys or whatever from Thousand Autumns. And of course, we already knew they weren't the spiders. So anyway, that's pretty much the only thing I have to say about that chapter. Just, of course, we also know that eventually Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo end up stumbling upon each other. And they're talking about this labyrinth that they're in, which is awful, by the way. I hate labyrinths. I've never been in one, but I love the movie The Labyrinth, and I knew from that moment I would never want to be in one. I was like, you know what, forget it. I don't even want to do a maze, because what if the maze turns into a labyrinth? What if it was a labyrinth all along? So anyway, Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo are here themselves, and they come to the conclusion that we're nemesis, but we're going to help each other out of this situation. So, they have a mutual respect for each other, kind of like how not Kuhezhen, Too-ahn Qinghe has a respect for Feng Xiao. And even when the girl tried to, pierce Yuwen Yihuan, when she tried to kill Feng Xiao, Too-ahn Qinghe backed up, and then, Feng Xiao was able to face the threat behind him, and he was like, I'm not about to fight with underhanded means. I'm not going to win that way, which was admirable, to say the least, or whatever it was. But anyway, so going back to Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo, I thought it was quite interesting with Xiao, Tsway Boo-qoo, and this imposter emperor going on the journey together through the labyrinth. And then when danger hit, when they came upon the Jade Tower that was entrancing them, and at some point Xiao had to make a choice between saving the imposter and Tsway Boo-qoo. He saved Tsway Boo-qoo, which I thought was quite interesting because that imposter was needed for his plan, but in a way, Tsway Boo-qoo was needed for him to escape. So I guess, of course, I see why he saved Tsway Boo-qoo over the emperor, fake emperor, but it was just interesting to see that. But I mean, this entire time, Xiao has definitely greatly respected and admired Tsway Boo-qoo, and that has been clear this whole time. I mean, at most, he hurt him a tiny bit on his shoulder that one time when he fought Feng Xiao, but other than that, he's always just spared Tsway Boo-qoo. So anyway, the imposter's dead, whatever. So we get to chapter 185, and I'm sorry if I said some things that were kind of scattered in the other chapters, but whatever. So yeah, they're still here. The imposter's dead, and Xiao, after they go through some more stuff, he's like, Tsway Boo-qoo, you're dying. And Tsway Boo-qoo is like, yeah, I know. And it was just so sad. Like, honestly, so I would say these are the most serious chapters that we have come upon. And finally, of course, who broke the mold of that seriousness? Feng Xiao. But before we get there, we see them going through the cave together, and Tsway Boo-qoo is barely holding on, and he's just reflecting on his life and, how much of a struggle it's been. And is on page 318, I left a bookmark. It said, Tsway Boo-qoo had discovered the true meaning of living in the sunlight. Each time he drew near, Tsway Boo-qoo felt a step closer to the exhilarating world of life. It was a constant irritation, yet it breathed life into his days. And this was in reference to Feng Xiao. And I just thought that was so beautiful because we know that Tsway Boo-qoo has this illness, right? We know that he grew up being treated harshly by his family. And so he kind of created this, not kind of, but he created this whole cold-heartedness about himself. He couldn't really exert too much energy, and he didn't really get to live. But to have Feng Xiao there, to be the light in his life, I just think that is such an amazing thing. When you see someone and they just give you that thing you were missing because you honestly could not obtain it given your circumstances, So I thought that was utterly beautiful. But anyway, they're still trying to figure out this array and everything, which is just crazy. I'm telling y'all, I could not. I absolutely could not. But anyway, going on to the next chapter, 186. I'm trying to think about my thoughts. Yuwen Yihuan, I have zero cares for her. Oh yeah, this was the chapter where Too-ahn Qinghe was like, I don't want to win by deceit, blah, blah, blah. Which, by the way, I thought it was interesting that on page 326, Too-ahn Qinghe was like, he couldn't bear to watch Feng Xiao die, so that's why he leapt after them into the labyrinth, because Feng Xiao was a rare and precious thing and truly an opponent. And it was like, you can find enemies anywhere, but a true opponent is someone that must be cherished. And I thought it was funny. Like, a part of me wanted to say, you're honorable, you're a man of integrity. But then I remember the first time they fought, he decided to fulfill Kuhezhen's wish by putting the goo worm inside of Feng Xiao. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that was like for his plan because they needed to have Feng Xiao arrested, blah, blah, snore. And I'm sure maybe Too-ahn Qinghe knew that Feng Xiao could get the goo worm out. But that was still a risky move. What if he didn't? What if he didn't notice that the goo worm was in him and then he ended up dying? It's like, screw your whole wanna be honorable and integritous. I'm not sure if that's a word, but it is today. Because you clearly were underhanded before, not necessarily for the fight, but for something else that could have led to Feng Xiao's death. So that's just me personally, but at the end of the day, Too-ahn Qinghe is just whatever. So then also we have Xiao, who's basically just like, hey bro, I'm also dying too, and I think it's pretty much time for us to give up, but Tsway Boo-qoo is just like, no, let's keep going. And Xiao eventually admits, like, we're very alike, but this is where you and I differ. I don't have that tenacity. Like, this is it for me. I know I'm dying and I'm just gonna die. You know you're dying and you're trying to hang on. And then on page 326, we also have a part I highlighted where, Tsway Boo-qoo was trying to hold on because he wanted to continue basking in the sun's warmth, plotting against Feng Xiao and gloating over his victories, and so he could protect more people like his mom, those who were kind and vulnerable, because he was cold-hearted and ruthless. And I kind of just wanted to challenge that that statement that he made about himself, or that perception of himself. I do not think that Tsway Boo-qoo is hard-hearted and ruthless. I actually think he is very soft-hearted and kind and considerate. But he knows that in order to protect the people that are like his mother, that he has to be hard-hearted and ruthless. But I believe at his core, he is a soft-hearted person who knows how to turn on the switch of ruthlessness. And that is something that is constantly on. But in order for you to... I'm trying to figure out how to say this. In order for you to come to the conclusion that in order to protect the people you care about, you have to become hard-hearted, that automatically shows your soft-heartedness. Y'all get what I'm saying? I don't know. I might just be pulling at straws. Who knows? Anyway, let me go through my notes a little bit more. So yeah, they're going through the labyrinth together, and he's communicating with Xiao. Xiao is exerting all of his energy trying to get Tsway Boo-qoo, because Tsway Boo-qoo can't leap over all this stuff, and it's just crazy. Like, I'm just like, what? So then finally, when they get to a point and Xiao is like, I can't go on anymore. I won't be able to leave this place. And Tsway Boo-qoo is like, if I can, so can you. And Xiao is just like, no, this is it, bro. So would you like me to pass on what I have to you? And I I was like, whoa, because he said that he would be passing on the Jade of Heaven Lake's essence. So anyway, we go to the next chapter where Tsway Boo-qoo is like, no, I'm not going to take that gamble, because he's not the type to take gambles, essentially. He's one who always plans things, you know. I mean, there's technically always a gamble, even in plans, but this is, you know, it ain't the same or whatever. So anyway, he's like, no, I'm not going to take this gamble. And Tsway Boo-qoo, I mean, Xiao thinks he's afraid, right? And for the first time, Tsway Boo-qoo actually admits that he's afraid, which I found very interesting. But it was nice to see them just conversing with each other, even though they are enemies or whatever. And so at the end of the day, we get to a point where Tsway Boo-qoo is trying to leave. Like, he finds the exit, and then Xiao is like, you may not wish to gamble, but I want to wager with you, which was crazy because, like, at first Xiao was like, why don't we just die together and we can accompany each other in the underworld? And I know that this wasn't like a romantic thing, but it almost felt like it in a way. Like he maybe admired Tsway Boo-qoo just a little bit past the regular platonic feelings of, wow, this guy is a genius and I would love to have him on my team. I'm not saying it is past that. I'm saying it could be. But no, I think he really just truly wanted someone to be there with him, to die with him, and go into the underworld together. But anyway, as Tsway Boo-qoo escaped, Xiao grabbed him and was like, no, let me take this wager with you. And so he starts pushing all this stuff into his body. And I thought it was just the Jade of Heaven Lake, only for us a little bit later to find out that it was also his martial essence. And I was like, wait, what? I didn't know he was going to do that. So now knowing that, I'm wondering how that will affect Tsway Boo-qoo in the future. Like, I don't think he'll practice martial arts, but it looks, he'll have the ability, right? So anyway, he's got the two poisons counteracting each other, as well as the martial essence and the Jade of Heaven Lake all within his body. But anyway, this NPC, Yuwen Yihuan, sees that Xiao is dead and is like, oh my gosh, my Xiao is dead. So why are you still alive? And, you know, she's just like, okay, so if you're still alive, but he's dead, then I'm going to kill you and I'm going to make you suffer the worst, most excruciating, painful death ever. So that way he could rest in peace. And I was like, lady, I don't think you truly understand Xiao. Like, you clearly know that he was so focused on his ambitions that he didn't have time for romance, which you clearly wanted. But I still don't think you understood him as a person, because it is, to my personal understanding, my personal opinion, that throughout this entire series, like I said, except for that one time where he squeezed Tsway Boo-qoo's shoulder and hurt him a bit, he has never had any malice or hard feelings or wanting to hurt of any kind toward Tsway Boo-qoo. He simply saw him as a worthy opponent, someone that he truly wanted on his team. Like, even to the last moments, he was like, you know, if you could have been on my team, that would have just been like so great, my dude. And Tsway Boo-qoo was just like, I'm gonna pretend like I didn't hear that. So anyway, for her to think that Xiao would want him in excruciating pain, I just think that she was misguided, very, very much misguided on that. And so the way that she did it, though, by, you know, slitting a little bit of his, what was his neck, and putting the goo worm in him and then watching it and then cutting open his chest so that she can pull out his heart. I was like, ma'am, you need to slow down now, because you cannot just mutilate his body like this. But fortunately, in the nick of time, Feng Xiao showed up and stabbed that sword through her. And I was so happy about it. And then eventually he cut off her head and it was sent rolling because I was like, ma'am, you are trying to kill the wrong person, okay? I will hop inside of this series and show you a piece of what I can do, which is not very much, but I'll figure it out, you know? So anyway, she was such an NPC. Like, I mean, I know why she was there and I get it and everything. And I'm not saying that Meng Xi Shi was wrong to put her in there, but it's just so interesting to see her try to, I don't know, try to assert herself to be something, but not really. You know, even her coming and into her mother and sister's life and that whole thing, it was just kind of like, okay, whatever. And then her seeing Feng Xiao and Too-ahn Qinghe dueling each other and trying to come at Feng Xiao. It's like, ma'am, who do you think you are? And in the labyrinth, trying to kill Tsway Boo-qoo. Ma'am, who do you think you are? Like, you're talking about how you never saw Princess Leping and Princess Ying as your family, but they were, in truth. The only reason y'all weren't close is because they thought you were dead, ma'am. That's it. There was nothing that they did to you that was cruel or harsh. And it's just that Shouw happened to find you and take care of you and show you how to read and write and study some martial arts. Like, girl, go sit down somewhere. Nevertheless, we get to Feng Xiao and Tsway Boo-qoo and they're together. And of course, he finally brings the funniness back because I was like, can we escape this seriousness now? Like, please. So he finds the jade and he's like, hey, you dropped this. And Tsway Boo-qoo is like, that's not mine. Maybe that was you and Yihuan's. And Feng Xiao was like, would it kill you, my guy, to just, you know, be honest for once? And he's like, actually, yes, I'm about to die. I was like, oh my gosh. But anyway, he promised that he would be honest if Feng Xiao won the fight against Too-ahn Qinghe, whatever. Now, I will say, this battle between Too-ahn Qinghe and Feng Xiao, it was interesting to see them literally just like fighting and then be like, okay, let's stop. Yeah, let's just, 3 years from now, let's just fight on this mountain or whatever, because if we keep fighting here, we'll probably die. And we both have things that we want. We both are not in this fight for real. At least Feng Xiao pointed that out. Not Too-ahn Qinghe didn't point that out. He probably didn't even notice. Who knows? Whatever. Doesn't matter. The point is, Feng Xiao got to Tsway Boo-qoo and was taking him out and everything. And their little last moment or whatever, it was very nice. But let's just say, the summary of this volume was not wrong at all. It said, I'm going to go back to the summary. It said, as Feng Xiao no, I'm not even going to read the whole sentence. He finds his relationship with Tsway Boo-qoo on new footing, though Tsway Boo-qoo would be the last to admit it. Well, bruh was even knocking on death's door and refused to be honest with Feng Xiao. And in the end, it was Feng Xiao who finally had to admit, I like you. And then he was like, if you live, I'll deign to stay by your side for a lifetime. And if you die, if you're buried, I'm going to find your bones and scatter them so you can't reincarnate. So that's that. Anyway, this has been a lovely story. I'm not going to lie. We have about 41 or 42 pages left of the story. And that makes me kind of sad because that is just it's the epilogue. I'm sorry, they're not extras. These are epilogues. And that's not enough for me. we have 4 epilogues and then a bonus story. But my brain is like, can I have maybe like 60 to 75 pages of extras, epilogues, and afterward? Okay, no. Alrighty, well, fine. But anyway, that is all I have to say. I am pooped, I think is the word I was actually looking for. So I hope you all enjoyed these chapters. Please let me know what you think of the main story, because we are officially done with that, which means, like I said, next time we will be looking at the epilogues, and either in that same video I will share my thoughts just on, my overall likes about Peerless, any dislikes I may have had, my favorite characters, least favorite characters, favorite side characters, the usual. And maybe some favorite quotes and lines, and then my favorite comments from you all. It'll either be that or maybe I'll just make a separate video. I'm not entirely sure just yet, but I know that for this one, we won't go live and discuss it just because when I read Peerless, I was not yet doing what I was doing for Yee-Hoo-ahn. So to me, it doesn't necessarily make sense to go into a live discussion about this final volume because I did not take extensive notes like I did with Yee-Hoo-ahn. And for anyone wondering, my Yee-Hoo-ahn notes, I'm sorry, I'm just going to look really quick so y'all can know, are 129 pages worth of notes. What was I thinking? So anyway, yeah, I hope you all enjoyed these chapters. And next time I see you, we'll be on to the epilogues. So have a good day and or night, and Me.Mimo.